Each year, the Board of Supervisors place $2,000 in Fund 100, account 3002800 for the Chamber of Commerce's in Madison County. I think there's 3. Each year, Mr. Egan paid the $800 LCPIC fee and the $20 fee for the Secretary of State from this account. Excuse me, apologies. We think it's inappropriate. We think it was done to hide the payments, but this may be the way you do business here. Prior to this year, Richard Egan paid these fees without bringing, prior to this year, this is the first time they brought those fees to the board to approve. 17 years he's been paying these without approval. We don't want to use the word secret or hiding, but it does appear that that may have been the case. Public records show that Madison County paid only $645,000 towards the 1989 $6.675 million worth of certificates of participation. The balance was assumed then, according to records, public records, that it was assumed by the newly created LCPIC in 1998. Supervisor Chapman, Supervisor Pyle, and Richard Egan have kept this debt hidden from the taxpayers for more than 17 years. So it's time to disclose. We have copies of a public records request, and if you choose not to comply, we are prepared to take it go one step further. But it will let you know. This was before Mr. Hammond's time, Mr. Hempel's, and Mr. Alwell's time. But Mr. Pyle and Mr. Chapman and Mr. Egan have been aware of this funding process or lack of funding process for over 17 years. So you get a copy of the public records request, and again, we are serious about following through and getting these documents.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are we on what, 4?
I think so. Yeah. Item number 4 was just simply something that had come up on a couple of occasions on the last year, at least that I was around. We had, excuse me, we had some closed sessions that involved a number of items that were anticipated to go longer, and we had actually started to post an agenda that said 8:30 start time, and then we realized that we can't by our own resolution. Our own resolution calls for 9 o'clock. And so, yet the ability to have a closed session between 9 and 9:30 and effectively deal with the great weight of the matters that we're on, it required careful deliberation and some time. Meanwhile, you've got a whole lobby full of people, and it just seemed like we ought to have a little more flexibility in our resolution to allow for, when necessary, and only when necessary, advancing the start time of a meeting, perhaps advancing the time that it starts. So, not changing the 9:30 opening ceremonies.
Well, you could state in the resolution that the normal time for closed sessions to start, because the public has the right to speak before you go into closed session, is 9 o'clock. But when need arises and dictates, that start time could be up as early as 8 a.m. if you wanted to.
That's basically what we do.
That's what we do, but the resolution doesn't reflect that.
Yeah, but we have steered away from that because in the last year at least, because of some challenges on that point at least.
Yeah.
And so, and what we've gone to is to do a closed session from 9 to 9:30 or thereabouts, and sometimes it's not, and then to postpone the closed session to later in the
And I
day.
think when the historic resolutions as we evolved, that was the idea that for many years, the closed sessions came at the end of the meeting. We didn't have an early start, and then I think they decided the CAMs that we needed to talk ahead of time, because some of the items that were possibly beyond the closed session tended to be an action item later on.
Yes.
In terms of what would be announced or reported. And so that was why they started having closed sessions before as a precursor. And the idea being is that after you ran out of the 30 minutes, that you continue the closed session to the end of the agenda.
And so I think you're hearing from staff that it is requested not necessarily to change, the proposition that closed session occurs from 9 to 9:30, but from time to time, when it does occur, that it's anticipated that a greater closed session time frame would be required, that we could actually have the flexibility in the resolution to advance the start time to 8:30 or 8 or
Well,
something.
until about 1989 or 90, that time frame in there, the board sessions normally would start at 10 a.m. So they moved the board session up to 9:30 at that time. So you could do it either way. You could, keep your 9 o'clock closed session and maybe not have your regular session start at 9 a.m.
That's what he'll want.
Well,
I don't know.
especially in the wintertime.
Exactly.
I don't think the regular time of the meeting should be changed. I think that'll be the thing. If you're going to have a long closed session, start it earlier or finish at the end of the evening.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that the 9:30 time change at all.
I think what we're doing is, though, should keep doing it. It's worded right in the resolution.
Okay.
Some of this could go down to item number 9, too. Which would be not scheduled to appointment.
That's a challenge that I don't know a solution to necessarily. And I'm looking for, I don't want to jump to another discussion point necessarily.
Right, but I'm saying these two could meld together if you're talking about changing times.
The suggestion I have for the departments is that perhaps we, because there's not a real clear solution, perhaps we delay department reports until after a certain time. Maybe that's 10:30 or so, and that way at least then staff and department heads don't have to be here until that time, and then we deal with all their issues after that.
Spencer, you had a comment?
Well, I'm a little confused here because you've had meetings at 8:30 before, you've had meetings at 8 o'clock before. You've had according to the Sunday agenda on your website, you started at 6 a.m. So, you know, that was an error, and it was fixed on Monday morning. But you have always had the I printed it, Susan. I'm sorry I printed it. It's on the website. Check it out. You know, you just made a mistake, so you don't have to lie about it. But you did. But anyway, you have the ability now, or you have been. I didn't know you were breaking rules, but you have had meetings at 8 o'clock in the morning, at 8:30 in the morning for closed session. If it is your intent to think that the people you don't want to hear from that come to the meetings, if you think that that's going to deter us, it's not. So make it at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'll be here. Jean will be here. Iona will be here.
Okay.
So you have the ability now, and you've exercised it, to continue your closed sessions in the afternoon. I think Mr. Burns' whole intent here is to keep Cammy helping and people that are your critics and want things to be done right.
I don't believe that.
Well, it looks like it.
Well,
I mean, from the discussion so far, that's what you're doing, and it's not going to work.
I don't operate on perception, I operate on facts, and I do not believe that is any intent to start early and try to keep people from coming. Anyhow, thank you for your comments, we're going to move on.
Yeah, if it's okay, we'll just clarify in the draft language that the flexibility exists. That's all.
Just clarify that in the language, okay.
Well, what it does is it takes away the argument of those who want to argue. So I think that's good.
I don't want to argue. Let's go to number 5, shift in time to certain matters.
There, did you want
Well, there are certain items in the resolution
order of business
that are if you look at, I think it's page 2,
Right.
where it says public hearings no earlier than 10 a.m., matters set for time certain normally begin no earlier than 10 a.m. We would just like the flexibility to be able to move those around a little more
Yeah, I did see the need for that.
to provide more structure.
Okay, so you want flexibility there. That'll be fine.
Number 6 was publication of the future board items list. That's that attachment page.
Well,
I don't know if that's...
that was never a part of it, and it became kind of like a tickler file because I think there was stuff that was being brought up at meetings, and then it was just sort of kind of never heard of again. And so the clerk's office, in order to started doing a tickler file, but it was for the clerk's office, and then that got passed out so people could see that that there was somebody looking ahead as to the agenda items, and before too long it was attached to the agenda. I don't think that was ever the intent.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jaden, wasn't that a comment that you had? I can remember back a year or so when we started that, it seemed like you had some comments about bringing up things and it never going anywhere.
I think it was Supervisor Chapman that brought that up a few times, that things seem to drop by the wayside.
But I don't think that the tickle file should be like the agenda. I think
Be
that
part of
was
the agenda.
being part of the agenda. I think it's good to have a file that you're trying to keep track of the things that people raise so that they don't just fall into oblivion, because they do, and they have.
They
and
do, they
will.
have 10 coffee to track.
But I think at the same time, it doesn't have to be a part of the agenda. And I think the clerk's office took it upon themselves to kind of help keep track of that, and I think that was a good thing. But how it got on the agenda wasn't something that was part of the resolution.
Where else would you put it?
Well, the clerk maintain it. Businesses do that to keep track of when they have to do things.
The question is, do we want to maintain that as part of the published agenda or not?
No, well, I don't think that was the intent.
Well, it's listed in the current resolution on page.
And that can be eliminated
Page
from
3.
the board resolution.
Well, the
If that's
list
the
of dates of upcoming board meetings, having your meetings get.
I'm sorry, number 20.
Number 20 on page.
Okay, yeah, that's something that somebody added in there, probably thinking they were doing good, but that wasn't the intent.
That's
never
easy.
been the intent.
That's easy to deal with.
Yeah. What clutters up the agenda makes it kind of hard.
Are we good with that?
Yes,
7,
that was an interesting conversation.
section
number
defining
7.
board relationships with elected county officers. I didn't know there was an issue.
I'm sorry, say again, sir?
I didn't know there was a issue.
Generally, there isn't.
Doesn't the civility thing govern that?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. You know, that's an excellent observation. I didn't really have a suggestion as I came into this conversation on that point, but I think it's perhaps just enough to say that on the list of those covered under Section 1, that reference is made to members of the Board of Supervisors, the public, and other county elected officers, period. And that's that.
There's none.
No, but I think there's one more thing that needs to be added to that, and I think that might be where we've got a whole bunch of newly elected county officers. So it's kind of, it's a new group, so that could probably be possibly the genesis. But and we also have new board members, and one of the things that I think that needs to be emphasized, and this is for the new board members coming from an old board member, is the board. The powers of the board only exist when the board's in session, which is 3 or 4 times a month. And then when the board's out of session, the power of the board evolves into the hands of the CAO. That's defined by state laws or by ordinance, by county ordinance. So individual board members do not possess the power of the board. So the ability to go into individual departments and offices and elected departments and sort of kind of, order things and push things around because they're members of the board is not, and that might be what's part of driven by that, is that the perception that board members are intruding. We don't have individual powers to do that. Now, what only keeps the board, the 27 days of the month that power is vested with the CAO, is the 3 days when we are here in terms of evaluating how the 27 days. So it doesn't say that board members don't have influence in the sense of, why are you doing this? Because that's not what the intent of the board in terms of the discussion. But board members don't have extraordinary power when it comes to interacting with the county bureaucracy outside of board sessions. And I think that sometimes trying to define that gray line becomes challenging for both board members and for staff. I mean, we get a constituent calls up, and they're mad because they went into such and such office and they got treated miserably. So the natural inclination, being a parent or something, is you're going to go in there and beat up those people for being mean to your constituent. Okay, well, that's not really how you conduct business. And I think that's maybe what is being addressed there. Or if you...
That's an excellent point. I don't think, though, necessarily that was the genesis of the reason for asking it be put on this list. I think the reason that it was asked to be put on this list is I think there were perhaps a few events in the past where essentially a countywide elected official felt like they had essentially been ordered or called to the carpet before the board in public session. And I'm not saying whether that was the case or not. I'm just saying that the perception about a county elected official, countywide elected official, whether constitutional officers or otherwise, felt like they essentially got called to the carpet before a body that at least they perceive really has authority over their budget, and that's where it ends. Now, those aren't my words necessarily, but I think that was the perception, and the question was, well, where does that start and where does that stop?
Well, when the board's in session and there's an elected or appointed or any other county department person who the board is unhappy with, I think if the board decides to let them know how unhappy they are, you may not have the power to control their day-to-day conduct, but we do have oversight responsibility and influence when it comes from the budgetary or whatever, staffing. I mean, there's a lot of avenues, and I've watched the board over the years conduct themselves. I mean, when I first joined the board, the county assessor was not in very good stead with other board members. And it was amazing to watch how that interaction took place.
Okay.
Okay. Could I comment on that?
Yes, you should. You can.
I think what that meant is, with a lot of us being new, is that if something is on the agenda and it's coming from our department, and you guys have questions about it, it would be nice to hear those questions before the board meeting. Because sometimes, especially being new, a lot of us aren't really comfortable yet getting up and talking to you. It would be nice to know what you're going to ask for, what your concern is. Not that we're going to solicit a vote from you, but I know, like with Aaron on the banking, I would have brought my binders that day had I had known that he was going to have questions. But to Jim's other thing, I had one of Tom's constituents who caught him in the market about tax sale, and I believe Tom did the right thing. He said, call Nancy at the tax collector's office and talk to her about it and see if she can't handle it for you. I appreciate that. I appreciate when we do all interact as a team, because I think that we are a team. And I think that we just really would like to hear from you about things on the agenda, not necessarily going to Richard or going to Bob. Maybe you can come and talk to us ahead of time, and then we know what you're unhappy with, or what you have questions with, or what you're going to want us to come to board that day and talk to you about what's on the agenda. I just think that some kind of lack of communication, and we are all brand new, and we just need to work through this. And that's what I think that was for, is just to kind of give us a heads up and talk to us and let us know where you're coming from, so we can come here prepared to discuss it with you.
And I think that's reasonable on, major questions, but a lot of times during the discussion, some things come up in your mind that, you can't pre-notify you about.
But I think it's still a fine line, because I've seen over the years board members who are overly aggressive and overly active in intruding into individual departments to try to, push them one way or the other. And I think that has to be, what you're saying is all well and good, but it's a two-edged sword. It could also cut the other way not so well. And I think we have to, and maybe that's what this issue is about, is how do you define that kind of a communication and working relationship. And it has to be kind of developed. It's not something that you just ordain. It has to be developed.
Well, the protocol needs to be developed,
Well, when board members go to new supervisors training, that's where they, with CSAC and at the state level, they try to encourage you how to conduct yourself when you're interacting with the various departments.
I think I'm going to be a little politically incorrect with you for just a second, if I might. That some of the elected officials, not including Nancy, she's been very good about standing up and stating her interest. Have expressed privately. Let's not forget we're countywide elected officials. We're not just a district. We've got a whole constituency of our own, and I think really that was just the observation by the board sometimes that exists for them was part of the reason that it was requested to be advanced. That's all.
Okay. Enough on that.
Good discussion.
It was.
Okay. How board members agendize things.
Sure, and I think I precipitated this as a discussion, and mainly just to have a discussion about how we place things on the agenda and how the board members place things on the agenda, and I view that as my role as being the conduit between the board and getting things on the agenda. And I'd like to put some systems in place that get things on the agenda efficiently, timely, and quickly, but don't cause a lot of grief with Susan.
And staff disruptions.
Yeah, or grief with the clerk's staff when I call them and say, we need this item on the agenda next week. And I think we all understand there's emergencies that come up that we have to deal with. But in terms of routine agenda items, I guess my request would be that we just put something in place that allows for a timely transmission of the information to the clerk's office, so that I'm not calling Susan on Wednesday morning.
In the resolution, it defines the time frames that you turn stuff in and how the staff paperwork gets turned in. And I think the one thing the board doesn't think about is, if you've got something you want on the agenda, and it's And even if you bring it up at a meeting like today, I want next week's agenda or the following week's agenda, that there's a clock running in terms of accumulation of materials that has to kind of basically come to a head in the clerk's office on Wednesday, Thursday, and the week before the agenda itself. And I know when it comes to these proclamations and things of those nature that I wind up getting involved in helping to produce is I've got to work hard to make sure that Susan has it in a timely fashion. And that's true of anything. If we've got something that we're working on, we want the board to discuss it, and it's going to be in the agenda. You know, it's not that you bring the stuff on Tuesday morning and distribute it. It has to be in the hands of the clerk's office no later than noon on Thursday, preferably by Wednesday. And according to our resolution, the departments have to have it turned in by the previous Friday.
And I guess I would suggest my preference for getting things on the agenda, and I know there's going to be multiple ways that we have to do that, but my preference, and I don't think Susan disagrees with me, is for them to come, if the time allows, to come out in board members' reports, you know, Richard, we'd like to have X, Y, and Z on the agenda, and not have it at the very next meeting, but the following meeting. Because when we say put it on the next meeting, that means we're all scrambling to get the agenda
Well,
put
the
together.
paperwork for the meeting after next is due this coming Friday.
Right.
Is what
Right.
we have to
So-
be mindful of.
So to the extent that that's possible, that I think is our general preference.
So basically, we have a policy, we're just not following it.
I didn't say.
I think, I think the departments and the staff are following because they're under lockdown, but the board members, but I don't think the board members understand that we have an obligation.
I don't know if it's that we don't understand, I think we just don't consider it, you know, I mean, yeah, I'll call Richard and say put this on the agenda, I'll call
Sure.
Susan and say put this on the agenda.
To a degree, they accommodate you.
They always accommodate me. But I mean, they're nice people.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Not to you,
Jane, could you turn the video on?
excluding Mr. Burton. Okay, I think Richard up that procedure, and if there's not one already.
Well, the best thing is you got Regina there, and if when in doubt, if you go and see Regina, she's good at capturing what you're doing and getting it plugged in a proper fashion.
And she's doing scrambling.
True. You could use another.
And you don't want to make her meetings unhappy.
No. Okay, how to schedule things so employees are not there all day.
We pretty much, Aaron, I think pretty much addressed
Yeah,
that.
and I try, you know, if I have an agenda, and I see some people come into that item, it's like a recognition committee, you know, I try to get through that. And sometimes board members will send you a note, you know, hey, so-and-so is here for a specific item. Yeah, we try to do that the best we can, but it's not always immediately.
Those were the items that, I'm sorry.
These seem, a lot of what we're talking about seems like really minor modifications or changes to
Well, I
the,
think on that issue, I think, you know, like we talked about when we incorporate video in that, I think the department heads, I mean, it's being streamed up audio, and my knowledge was like, you know, staff needs to be here. If you're listening to it, it's hard to get engaged in how the pace is going. Just through audio, it's like listening to a baseball game or
It's hard to know when to show up.
hard to know when to show up, but if you do a video, I think that would solve a lot of that problem.
I think it'll definitely help.
Part of it is you know, geographic location, coming across town basically to go to a meeting and trying to get it right, not being late, you know. But, yeah.
Aaron, that's what-
Yeah, I have one other question. On page 10 of the 12-039.
Page 10, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Under section plan procedure for hearings. On number 2, it says any supervisor may voluntarily or involuntarily disqualify. What's that involuntarily?
That's when you're challenged by somebody for.
I think Aaron's question is who has the authority to preclude
Yeah.
board member? Don't know.
That's a great question. I
Don't
don't
know the answer to that.
know the answer to that.
I mean, you can't.
I don't think the board as a body has the authority to exclude an individual member from a vote on a particular item. Yeah. I don't think it's
on here.
Yes.
Under that too, that's a good question, but
Yes.
there's a part in there in the middle that I think needs to be looked at as it relates to the requirements of the Brown Act that have kind of been modified in recent years. It says, except that the disqualified board member may address the board as a member of the public regarding the issue during the time that the general public speaks on the issue. And I think that almost has to be removed from that paragraph, because when you're disqualified under those provisions of state law, you're supposed to like leave the room. You cannot influence the discussion and deliberation of the remaining board members. And that's something that is more of a recent refinement. I mean, it's evolved over the years, but probably the last 5+ years, that's been pretty much the standard. So how can you be required to leave the room, but yet at some point come back in and address the board, even though you're supposed to be out of the room? So board members usually don't come back in and address the rest of the board under that. Now, this might have been permissible 15 or 20 years ago, but I think in more recent years, that's not even permissible anymore. So that should probably be totally stricken out of it.
I'd like to take a look at that, because I think there's a genuine issue there. I respect you, Mr. Chapman. I'm still under the impression that it's permissible. I want to look, though. I'm not certain one way or
But
the
you
other.
might want to look
Yes.
closely, because I think that just in the last couple of years, there's been a number of cases that have come down that basically, and I mean, this is going to the trainings that we've been
Yes,
to.
sir.
They make it real clear that that question, I think, wasn't the last time, but maybe the time before, was asked by somebody, wasn't from the board here, but was one of the other boards saying, if I'm disqualified, yet I want to come in and testify, you know, and that specific question, and I think that attorney that was doing the training, I think we were all down to Bet's office somewhere at that time. He made it real clear, no, the law says that you leave and you stay out of the room until they call you back in.
There's Brown Act issues, and there's conflict of interest issues, and political reform act issues. There's
Oh.
two different statutory schemes going on there.
And they cross cut across each
They
other. And what I'm saying is that particular language in here may not be something that's operable, because my impression is where we are now, you can't stick around and
But
just
still, if you were the guy, say if I was building a house or something, and had the planning deal, as the applicant, I could stand up and say my spiel on it fairly.
No, I don't think you, I don't.
You have to
You
step
you
in.
at the
I
time,
don't think
we've
you
got-
have to
Sit in the
step down.
audience and talk.
at times we've had board members go to
Some of
the
the
podium.
Wasik do that.
Yeah, Wasik did that.
Jack Hansen did that on a few occasions,
Yeah,
but the point being is under the older rules, that might have been permissible, but I think the current standard now is, I mean, your wife can come and speak on your family from that, but the idea is that you,
I wouldn't be worried about it.
yeah, I think you might find yourself.
It's a good point to explore. I don't have an answer for you, gentlemen.
Well, ask the FPPC or whoever, they'll tell you.
Okay, any other questions on this? I think that's the last
Thank you
agenda
for
item.
that discussion.
Okay.
We'll bring back a draft
Yeah.
resolution to